Chapter 2. Cato of Moonshield. Cato woke up soaking wet. He was covered in ice-cold sweat from head to toe, as if the snowflakes from his dream had melted into his waking life. Although he was no longer in the dark abyss of his dream, he still couldn't see a thing. His hair stuck to his face like a curtain that blocked all light from reaching his eyes. That was fine for the time being. He was still completely discombobulated from his abrupt transition back to reality and absently stared into nothingness until his heart calmed down a bit. He wasn't able to stop thinking about the strange dreams that kept terrorizing his sleep for the past 2 weeks. It wasn't the dark abyss he called the Shadow Realm that bothered him. He had been visiting that place for as long as he could remember. But rather the parts that felt like he had invaded someone else's dream. Ever since he returned home from a diplomatic mission to Aspera, Onira's neighbouring nation to the south, he kept seeing the twins in his dreams. The first time they made their appearance, he thought nothing of it. After all, dreams were just dreams. But then they returned the following night, and the night after that, and the night after that as well. He skipped sleep for a few nights after that, but what he just woke up from was his 7th meeting with the twins. The dreams were never exactly the same. The locations seemed to be picked at random. Sometimes the twins looked like adults, while at other times they were mere children. But despite the differences in setting or appearance, the dreams always followed the same plot. The twins would start off holding each other's hands. Then the boy would whisper something Cato could never properly hear. And from that point forward, everything would go from worse to an absolute nightmare. The girl would die. Always. Her death never failed to give him the feeling of being forsaken. Like a god stripped from his divinity. Like a king thrown off his throne. He would be left behind in an empty void with the boy who seemed to harbour a deep-rooted hatred for him. And yet, the dreams always ended with the boy extending his hand in an invitation to join him. Cato finally wiped his hair over his head and heaved a heavy sigh.
"Who are you?"
he asked out loud. It was strange to hear his own voice again.
"What do you want from me?"
he continued in thought, not giving himself the chance to get unnerved by the sound of his own voice. He threw his blanket off him and stared at the dark ceiling of his bedroom for a while. His eyes were heavy, but he was determined not to fall asleep again. As much as the dreams fascinated him, they were starting to take a toll on his mind. For the past 2 weeks he had been completely obsessed with the twins. They were all he could think about. He sighed again, though this time it sounded more like a grunt, and cast his eyes to the side. Through his bedroom window he saw a full moon clinging to a starless sky. He stared at it for a while and winced. The position of the moon told him that he was still hours removed from daylight. His mind inadvertently drifted back to the twins.
"Who are you? How am I related to you? What do you want from me? Why do I get the feeling that I am supposed to know you? What are you even trying to tell me? Are you in danger? Am I in danger?"
He was asking questions that only led him down a path paved with many more questions. No matter how hard he tried to solve the puzzle, all he accomplished in the end was getting the pieces scrambled and pushing himself farther away from seeing a clear picture. Somehow, he felt that he was supposed to know the answers already. They were on the tip of his tongue, but he kept stuttering and struggling to make it past the first syllable.
"I can't keep doing this to myself,"
he said, finally having found the courage to hear his own voice again. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and slowly let his lungs deflate.
"Jump in the river. Let the current guide you."
He was using the words from his master to pacify the chaos in his mind.
"In the end, we all reach our destinations."
It did seem to help, if only for a little bit and only for a little while.
"Fuck it,"
he said and sat up straight. He opened his eyes again and seemed to begrudge the moon for having barely moved at all. If sleeping wasn't an option, he might as well keep himself busy. He had a big day ahead of him, and the very least that he could do was to make himself look presentable. Grandmaster Aemon had called for a gathering of all noble members of Onira. For the first time in nearly 6 years, even the 8 masters who formed the nation's ruling council would come together to discuss their plans for the future. Cato simply couldn't allow himself to appear as if he didn't belong. He worked way too hard to be where he was. He knew that he was a valuable asset to his nation, but had always been unreasonably sensitive about his status as an Oneran lord. Unlike most nobles who were born into their ranks, he came from humble beginnings. Not many people actually cared too much about his past, but he did. It was a stain on his reputation he was never able to clean. He got out of bed and groggily shuffled toward the stove to put a kettle on the fire. After a few minutes that went by without any conscious thoughts, he poured himself a hot cup of chrysanthemum tea and went back to the window by his bed. He gazed into the black horizon and put the cup against his lips without taking a sip. He was greeted by the violent waves of the ocean, a few hundred feet below his cliffside mansion. In the distance, he saw the neighbouring city of Crescent Bay, already fully awake. Dozens of fishermen and traders were loading their boats, getting ready to leave the docks as soon as they were kissed by sunlight. He turned his eyes to the distant horizon, far away from the shores. The dark silhouette of a massive building rose above the illuminated walls of Onera's capital city, Raven Nest. The structure looked like a cat that was arching its back before taking a nap. He still remembered the first time he saw the Ashen Cat Castle from up close.
It feels like a whole lifetime ago,
He thought solemnly as his mind started wandering off to a time in his life he hadn't visited since leaving it behind. But the dream he woke up from had him feeling nostalgic, so he simply went along with the current of his thoughts. He was an orphan, and for as far as his memories were allowed to take him, only remembered being an orphan. For the majority of his life, he had been known as Cato of Moonshield, because like all orphans, he inherited the name of the place he grew up in.
the clan of Moonshield.
He thought with a bitter taste in his mouth and stared at the chrysanthemum tea in his hands without giving it any blame.
The largest family in all of Onera.
He remembered how empty and bleak his life had been. At an age far too young, he had already come to an understanding that the world he lived in wasn't going to be merciful with people like him. Children who had already suffered through the pain of growing up without the love and support of parents were destined to continue down the path of misery once they outgrew the orphanage. Most orphans had no history and no heritage, which meant that they had no standing in society. Therefore, it was generally expected that most orphans would have no prospect of a better future. Those who were lucky enough might find themselves serving one of the noble families, where they would work in the stables, kitchens and households, doing the dirty work that nobody else wanted to do. The ones who were blessed with the gift from Ava or knew how to handle a blade could either serve as soldiers or personal guards. And those who were born with an attractive appearance would be utilised in a more stress-relieving manner, with some even climbing to the status of an official concubine. The vast majority of the orphans were not so fortunate, however. They were bound to be seduced by the calling of the streets sooner or later, and almost guaranteed to become beggars, thieves, swindlers, prostitutes, or thugs once they left the orphanage. Cato always feared that when he was to come of age, he would succumb to a similar fate.
How different my life would be if you never showed up, Master.
He sank deeper into his thoughts and began to lose himself to his bittersweet memories.